Welcome back. Another week. I think it's week 6 already. Amazing. We're going through this all together and it's been a great ride. So if you're part of this and you haven't donated yet, I suggest that you do it. Remember, it's a great course. I'll put the link in the description. Now, this week we've been working on listening. Listening is probably one of the most important parts of being a musician. I think being a human being, we need to listen first, always, especially when we communicate to people. But listening is super, super important for music because music is naturally just sound. And if we don't listen, we don't know what it sounds like, we don't know how to create that music. So, just to recap a little bit on this week's listening, we talked about just listening to different recordings so we can get different ideas for our own playing. There's also the part of listening which is listening to ourselves while we practice, so that we have that what I call the listening loop. We listen to something, goes into the brain, we react to it, or is it good, is it not good, go back to our body and see if we can improve that sound or whatever it is that we're playing. So that listening is part of our practicing. I will talk a bit more about that. And then there's also what we're listening for. Are we listening for the sound? Are we listening for musicality? Are we listening for intonation? What are we trying to work on? Also, one other thing that I touched about is listening to other people in general, but especially when we are rehearsing for a concert, we're rehearsing as part of a group, whether it's a chamber group or orchestra or just a group of instruments playing the same piece. Listening is what's going to really gel the group together. So, like I said, there's lots of different kinds of listening. Even if you're listening just to learn something, listening to learn by ear, that is one of the listenings that's really important, because in the music, if you get the music sheet and you try to just read what says in there, it's only so much information that composer can put on a paper. It's how we take that and make it real music that's gonna make the difference. Because many people can play the same piece, but it's gonna sound very different. So by listening, we learn how other people do that process of getting the music out of the paper and making real music. And the more we listen, especially to the pieces that we are learning, but also to a wider, broader selection of music, the more we listen, the more we are creating our own inner sound that we talked about last week. So that tone that is so special for us, it comes from listening to others first and then integrating all of that and making our own sound and musicality within us. Musical ideas are best learned by listening to others, and the sound as well. If we listen to the sound, we know what we want inside our heads. Then we need to kind of work out how to make it sound out of our instrument. But first of all, we need to have it inside ourselves. And to get it inside ourselves, we need to listen first. So listen first is probably going to be the main thing I'm going to say. At the same time, we always need to listen first when we're talking to somebody. Otherwise, you get to that situation where people are talking to each other but not listening to each other. That's not going to go very far. So start by listening to each other. So let's talk now about what I was suggesting earlier about rehearsing. Especially if you're playing with somebody else, whether it's one person or a few, but they're not playing the same part as you. They're playing different parts. Let's say violin and piano accompanying, or string quartet, or a small orchestra where there's different parts. Now, while we're listening to what we are playing, we need to also be listening to the whole, how the whole is sounding together, how it balances together. We need to also be listening to the other part and see how we interact with the other part. And that's going to be a very good practice when you're rehearsing or when you're having a lesson, a group lesson, for example, or an orchestra session, whatever it is. Try to refine your listening for that, because that, like I said, that's going to be not just gelling everyone else, But it's going to make a massive difference in your playing and everybody else is playing. So we talked about listening to recordings. We've talked about listening to each other. Now let's talk about listening to yourself when you are practicing. So like I said earlier, we have our own sound inside, the sound that we want to produce, the sound of the music that we're going to play. And that comes from our head, from our hearts, from inside us. And it comes through us and it goes into signals for our nerve endings to know how to produce that sound on the instrument. We do that, the instrument sounds, and it goes into the air, and those waves go back to our ears. The ears perceive it and goes back into our brain and our body, and then our brain will analyze it and say, well, actually, that's not exactly the sound that I was trying to make, so let's make small adjustments. That small adjustments go back to our body, try to produce differently, and then that goes back to our ear, and from our ear to the brain say, is that better or not? So we're constantly doing that, like, I don't know how many times per second, but millions of times. It's just a really fast process that keeps going on and on. So the more we refine our listening while we are playing, the more we'll be able to adjust and get better sound, because we're trying to improve on the spot all the time. If we don't listen, we won't know if it's something like it's in our head or in our hearts. It will just be sounding one way or another. So that's really, really important. That I call the listening cycle. So make sure that that listening cycle is working, and we can improve it by listening better. And trying to really focus on getting that sound better will increase that the quality of the cycle. Finally, listening is going to be crucial for making a better sound, a tone, and also for musicality. I said it a few times, but I'm going to say it again. If you want to improve your musicality, your creativity in your playing, you must listen as much as possible. Like we said, we listen to each other, we listen to different recordings, get different ideas, but it's the quality of the listening that's important. We could be listening just passively, that's important for learning a new piece, for example. But if we want to improve our sound or our musicality, we must listen focusing on those things. So we're focusing on the sound, we're focusing on the phrasing, we're focusing on dynamics, focusing on articulation. Everything that we really worked on a couple of weeks ago to do with musicality and tone, if we focus on those things while we're listening to, let's say, somebody else playing this piece or another piece, and we get like, oh wow, look at how he's doing that thing. And we're trying to recreate that in our head, so that the next time we practice it, we're going to try to imitate that process. It will sound different, it will never be the same. So imitation is not a bad thing in that way, because we're not going to copy cats. We're just going to try to recreate something that we heard and make our own version of it. And by doing that, we are really learning how to make a better sound and how to be more musical. So, very simply, this week, listen more. Listen first. If we can do that, it's going to make a massive difference in our playing, it's going to make a massive difference in our sound and our musicality. So really, really try listening more and listening first. Listening to each other, listening to yourself, and listening to others, either recordings or live in a concert. So thank you very much. I will see you next week, and we will continue with more tips for practicing. So if you haven't subscribed and liked this video, please do it now so you don't miss any of them. Thank you, everybody. Bye.